mountain. I've been down a small town, oh, small community.
Good evening, Rapid City. How are you? All right, more excited. It's not, it's past happy hour. It is great to be home. It is beyond great to be home. And it is even better to be here talking about my life's passion, which is education and opportunity. Education changes lives. That's all I can say. I've seen it. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the life of every person I think I've met over 6 continents, 50 states, almost 50 years of being on this earth. And as Jared said, I'm a 5th-generation South Dakotan. I think there's a great meme going around Facebook right now that explains why I'm a 5th-generation South Dakotan, which says, South Dakota, come for the culture, stay because your car won't start. But all joking aside, I treasure the roots that my family has put down in this great place. I have a stone in my house. It was the keystone of a dugout in eastern South Dakota. My great-great-grandfather was a stonemason, and he etched his initials into that keystone. I look at that every single day and every single night, and it reminds me of why I'm here, and it reminds me of where I came from. Now, even though my roots are firmly planted in South Dakota soil, as Jared said, I have a real hard time staying in one place. I like to go. And I've found that my education has come as much from being in different places, from mud huts in Kenya to beautiful hotels in Bangkok and everything in between, as much from there as from any classroom, and perhaps more. Because when you screw up your visa in Russia, it's a teachable moment. I learned that. But I always come back to my connection to my roots, and that picture behind you with the cute red arrow tells you exactly why I stay connected to my roots. They're the only way I got up that damn mountain in Thailand. My mother, who's in the audience tonight, is seeing this picture for the first time. I tell you, Mom, I was careful. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And my family. They're the rock behind me. And we're now 6 generations in. As you can see in that picture, my sisters are quite a fertile bunch. I haven't contributed. And you could ask, how is it that you sustain for 6 generations? And a lot of it has to do with education. And what's changed my life was what my parents did. My parents didn't go to college right out of high school. It wasn't an option. But in their 30s, they had a dream. They knew they wanted a better life for them and for their children, and for their children to see the value of that education, that perseverance. So with 2 full-time jobs, 4 kids, they set out back and forth to Rapid City over and over and over again for years. And I'm going to apologize to my younger sister, who's also in the audience tonight. She was the victim of my attempts at grilled cheese sandwiches for multiple years. I got better at it, but it took practice, and she was the guinea pig. But they finished. How many people in this room can say, show of hands, that you went to college at the same time as your parents? It's a trip, isn't it? I highly recommend it. My father graduated in 1992, my mother in 1993, me in 1994, my older sister graduated law school in 94 also. Brought us closer together as a family. But for those values and for that persistence, for my mother who's in the audience tonight, thank you. And I love you for that. And my parents believe, as do Bill and Melinda Gates, for whom I am so privileged to work for. They believe deeply in their core that education is a bridge to opportunity. But I'm also here to tell you tonight that education is more than a bridge to opportunity. It is the path, or a big part of the path, to healthier communities that are made up of healthier individuals. And we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of health that we mean. But I'm here to say, any strategy for a healthier community has to include a strategy for a more educated community, a more trained community, a more skilled community. They go hand in hand. It's a both and. So I want to look at health in different respects. One, probably the most obvious, is economic. And this is where I'm going to do death by PowerPoint, but I promise to go fast. You can see a curve. This is what people make on average in a week in this country. The economy that we are in now and the economy that we will be in absolutely, positively punishes people that have not finished high school, and it's not much better to people that have only finished high school and have done nothing else, whether that is an apprenticeship or a short-term certificate or a bachelor's degree or PhD. You can see that curve, and that curve in the last 10 years has just gotten steeper. You see the same thing with your likelihood of having a job. Again, when you are looking at somebody that didn't finish high school, you're looking at a situation where they are multiple times less likely to be gainfully employed than somebody who has gone and gotten something beyond high school. And that then spills over into the other aspects of health, because if you think about it, if you're having to work 2, 3 jobs and look after kids and figure out your transportation, this gets to the other part of the health of our communities, and it's the ability to participate. A healthy community is a vibrant community because people show up. Woody Allen once said, "Life is 90% showing up." I tried to tell that to my boss the other day. I still didn't get the rating I wanted. But this is from the most recent presidential election, and it startled me. I always knew that there were those differences, but when you see how dramatic those differences are, and we see some similar dynamics when we look at volunteering, whether it's with local nonprofits or in a child's school, we see some of the same patterns, and it's not hard to understand. If you're scrambling to make it, it is hard to pay it forward. And if you're scrambling to make it in this economy, it has a lot to do with the skill levels that you have. Now I want to bring it to the physical health part of this discussion. And it's again not surprising that the more education and training you have, the likelier you are to have better health outcomes. You are less likely to smoke. You are less likely to abuse alcohol or drugs. My favorite was a stat that once said people who are more educated are more likely to be wearing a seatbelt when they get arrested for DUI. I don't know why somebody was tracking that. They were. My sister, the attorney, would appreciate that very much. But I want to draw your attention to this. This is white men 50 to 54 years old that you're looking at on the screen. Almost my people, not quite. Most of us have grown up in a time when our life expectancy in this country was constantly on the rise. And I grew up as a child of the 70s and 80s believing with the American exceptionalism, it's always going to be that way because we're always the best. We're going to get better. Nothing can change that. Well, a couple of researchers from Princeton started digging into the numbers recently. What they found was among some populations within the last 15 years, life expectancy has started to go down. And it is especially true for people who have less education and training. People who have less education and training at middle age are dying younger. And if we let that sink in for a second, that has multi-general implications. Because if their children who are in their 20s and teens are looking at that, and they see a lack of hope, and they see those mortality rates, it has a lasting imprint that's hard to undo. When you look at that dividing line, somebody with a bachelor's degree, 3 times less likely to be dead in their mid-50s. And I want to show you what this looks like at a national level, and you can probably, if you squint really close, you can squint and see western South Dakota. The brown represents a higher death rate, and these are people 45 to 54, so these are my peeps. The brown represents higher death rates. And you look at where that brown has crept up in the last 15 years. And though South Dakota is not brown, which is good news, it's gotten a little darker in the shade. And that's something that we need to absolutely consider, is this is now becoming a life and death issue. This is not just a nice to have, this is a have to have in terms of what we think about and what we talk about making sure that our communities are healthier and more educated. So what does this all mean? What does this add up to? What do we do? I want to start with where we are. That's where we often in the foundation, we get a problem and they say, well, what are we going to do about it? First thing is, look at the numbers. Start where we are. And I want to draw your attention to the blue bar that's circled in red. That represents people, adults, who have some college. They've gotten a credit, they've gotten a semester, maybe they've gotten close to all the way, but they didn't finish. It's about a quarter of the adult population in the Rapid City metro area. Almost the same proportion for the state of South Dakota. It's not unusual. We see that basic proportion play out in state after state after state nationwide. Why do I raise that? Because if we want to be on a journey to healthier communities, let's start with people that have already put their foot in the door. Let's start with people who have demonstrated that drive, that desire, that spark to do something better, the one that my parents had. And let's figure out, how do we help them get to the next place? What we've discovered as a foundation is that there are a lot of things that would seem to be small barriers that end up being life-changing things for somebody who is trying to go back to college at 26 with kids working full-time. We need to understand what those barriers are and do what we can to help ease them. Because the learning should be the hard part of education after high school, not the bureaucracy. And we're often seeing that the other way around, and it's unfortunate. And why is this important? We are in an age now where if we don't start raising those skill levels, those training levels, those education levels, the split that we're already seeing between what we spend on healthcare and what we spend on education, it's just going to get wider. And I think it's going to be a sad state of affairs if we're starting to pit meds versus eds. Again, as I've said, they go hand in hand, but we have to be looking at them together as a both and not an either or. So what do we do about this? What do we walk out of here with? I think that the hosts have said very eloquently that they want people to be engaging these issues and thinking about them, and more importantly, doing something about them after we walk out of here, so that it's not just a great evening at the theater. First step is we've got to understand better who is trying to get more education after high school today. There are a lot of people walking around, because I spend a lot of time in focus groups across the country, that believe that when you say college or when you say technical school, you're talking about an 18-year-old that's right out of high school with mom and dad at home, and they get in the car and they go to campus and they finish in 2 years or 4 years. That's nice, but that's actually not the reality. 40% of the students in our colleges and universities are 25 years old or older. Almost a third of them have kids. 2/3 of them are working. And a good number of those are working full-time. So I go back again to that image of my parents. Mid-30s, 4 kids, 40 hours a week, and then there's school. And sometimes when things get hard, the easy thing to do, or the thing that you have to do, is trade off a semester. And sometimes one semester becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 4, becomes never. And we have to find ways to stop that cycle. We need these people. We also need to identify who they are. They're in our businesses. They're in our churches. They're in our families. And asking the simple question, where do you want to go? What would you, if you had your desire, if you had your dream, what is it to do? And what is it that you need to get there? Obviously, money factors into it. It always does. But we find that it's also things like childcare, transportation, things that we can address and we can fix. And it's linking arms with other organizations across communities. I was fortunate enough, again, I come from a very blessed and talented family. My cousin is at Catholic Social Services and leads their Prosperity Initiative and was describing to me the work that they're building with Western Dakota to help identify those students when the first time they stop going to class, figuring out what's up. And is it something that is bigger than you, student, can do for yourself and that you need somebody to help and lend a hand with? And for educators and healthcare professionals, it is sending that message that education and health go hand in hand. It's not an either or, it is a both and. And we will only be as successful in our health outcomes as we are on our education. We're only as successful in our education as we are in being a healthy community. They have to be thought of in tandem. And everybody asks the chicken and the egg question. We're dealing with poultry either way, folks. And for every single person in this room, just think of that one person. You have to have one person in mind. And if you don't, go home and ask a significant other or another family member. Chances are you're going to find one. With a quarter of people, the odds are pretty good. And there's something that all of us can do. I think back to my parents' experience. And I wonder, how many times would it have been nice just to have somebody that understood the hard day in class and gave them just that atta girl, atta boy, keep going. You're doing the right thing. Or do you need somebody to take care of your kids for a night because your babysitter fell through? Or are you a little short on book money this semester? You know, some of those simple things we think don't make a difference, they do. They absolutely do, and we've seen it in our work at the foundation. Speaking of the foundation, there are two things that are drilled into us, and I guess I should say I'm glad they are. One is the essential value that Bill and Melinda brought to starting the foundation, which is every person deserves the chance to live a productive and healthy life, wherever they are. It doesn't matter if it's Rapid City or it's Rwanda. Every person. And that is something that inspires and drives me every single day. The other relates to the theme of this gathering tonight, which is an African proverb that we have etched onto the wall as you walk into our Seattle headquarters. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if we're in the root building business of this 7th generation and 8th generation and 9th generation and 10th generation, we are going to have to garden together. So let's get out there and grow some roots. Thank you.